Welcome back to AU Family Channel, and thank you so much for being here. It truly means the world to have you as one of our loyal listeners. If our stories have ever touched your heart, we are so grateful that you keep coming back to spend this time with us. So find somewhere comfortable, take a slow, deep breath, and let us begin today's story, together. I was 16 years old when I found a letter that told me my father had another child, a son he had given away long before I was ever born. My father had died only 3 months earlier, and I believed I had already learned everything that grief could teach a person. I was wrong about that. That single folded letter cracked my whole world wide open, and the stranger at the center of it would change the way I understood my father, my family, and forgiveness itself. This is the story of the half-brother I did not know existed, and how the angriest chapter of my entire life slowly became the one thing that finally began to heal me from the inside. My father died on a cold gray morning in April, and for a long time afterward the whole house felt like one held breath. He had been a quiet man, steady and gentle, the kind of dad who fixed broken things without ever being asked and almost never raised his voice. My mother and I moved through those first terrible weeks in a fog, cooking meals we did not eat and answering calls we did not want. I was 15 when he first got sick and 16 when he finally passed. I truly believed I had known him completely. I did not understand yet that even the gentlest people carry locked rooms inside them that no one else is ever allowed to enter. About 2 months after the funeral, my mother asked me to help her clear out the small wooden desk in my father's study. Neither of us had been able to touch that room until then. It still smelled like him, like old paper and the faint cedar of his aftershave, and part of me wanted to leave it sealed forever, like a museum of the man I had lost. But bills were piling up, and there were documents we needed, and so on a quiet Sunday afternoon I sat down on the worn carpet and began pulling open the stiff old drawers one by one, not knowing that the very last one would hold something that would change everything I thought I knew. The bottom drawer was locked, which was strange, because nothing in our house was ever locked. My father was not a man with secrets, or so I had always believed. I found the little brass key taped underneath the desk, hidden in the one place a curious child would never think to look. My hands were shaking a little as I turned it. Inside there was a slim metal box, cold to the touch, and inside that box was a small stack of papers held together with a rubber band that had gone brittle with age. I almost put it all back without looking. I have thought 1,000 times about how different my life would be if I had. But I did not put it back. On top of the stack was a photograph I had never seen before. It showed my father as a very young man, maybe 19 or 20, standing beside a girl I did not recognize, and she was holding a newborn baby wrapped in a pale blue blanket. My father was smiling in that picture, but it was a frightened kind of smile, the smile of someone standing at the edge of something far too big for them. I turned the photo over. On the back, in my father's careful handwriting, were 3 words and a date from 25 years before I was born. The 3 words were, "My son Daniel." And I sat there on the floor and forgot how to breathe. Under the photograph was the letter. It was addressed to me, though it had never been sent, and the paper had yellowed at the edges from years of waiting in the dark. My father must have written it when he first learned he was sick, because it began by saying that if I was reading it, then he had most likely run out of time to tell me himself. He wrote that he was a coward for putting it on paper instead of saying it to my face. And then, in his neat and shaking hand, he told me the thing he had carried alone for almost 30 years. When he was 19, he had a son, and he had given that son away. He wrote that he had been young and terrified and completely broke, that the girl he loved had family who would not allow them to keep the baby, and that both sets of parents had decided the child would be adopted by strangers before my father was even old enough to fight for him. He wrote that he had held his son exactly once, for 11 minutes, in a hospital room that smelled of bleach, and then a nurse had gently taken the baby from his arms and he had never seen him again. He wrote that he had thought about that boy every single day for the rest of his life, on every birthday, at every holiday, in the quiet minutes before sleep found him. I did not cry at first. I think I was too stunned to cry. I read that letter 3 times sitting on the cold floor of the study, and with each reading a hot and ugly feeling grew inside my chest until I could barely contain it. It was not sadness. It was fury. My father, my gentle and honest father, the man I had put on the highest pedestal in the world, had lied to me my entire life. There was a whole human being out there, a brother, my brother, who shared my blood and my father, and I had been kept in the dark about his existence for all 16 years I had been alive. I carried the letter downstairs and put it in front of my mother without a single word. I watched her face as she read it, and I understood in an instant that she had known. She had known all along. She sank slowly into a kitchen chair and told me that my father had confessed it to her before they married, that it had been the great private grief of his life, and that they had decided together never to tell me because they did not know how. She was crying, but in that moment I had no comfort to give her. I felt like the ground I had stood on my whole life had been quietly rotten the entire time, and no one had warned me. The weeks that followed were some of the darkest I have ever known. I was grieving a father I could no longer speak to, and now I was also furious at him, and there is no lonelier feeling than being angry at someone you can never confront. I would lie awake at night and argue with him in my head, demanding answers he could not give me. How could you keep him secret? How could you smile at me over breakfast with that boy living in the back of your mind? Did you ever plan to tell me? Was our whole family just a comfortable way for you to hide from what you did? The silence that answered me was unbearable. I started to see my father differently, and I hated that I did. Every warm memory I had of him became suspect, tilted, like a photograph hung slightly crooked on a wall. When I remembered him teaching me to ride a bike, I now wondered if he was thinking of the son he never got to teach. When I remembered him at my school plays, I wondered if some part of him was mourning the plays he had never been invited to. The father I had loved so simply and so completely had become a complicated stranger, a man with a shadow I had never seen, and I did not know how to grieve someone I was no longer sure I had ever really known. My schoolwork fell apart. I stopped talking to my friends, because how could I explain any of this to a 16-year-old whose biggest worry was a math test? I snapped at my mother over nothing and then hated myself for it, because I could see how much she was hurting too, carrying her own grief and now mine on top of it. One night she came and sat on the edge of my bed and told me softly that she had watched my father suffer over this secret for decades, that he had wanted to find his son so many times but had been terrified of upending the boy's life. She said, "Your father was not a bad man. He was a frightened one." Those words stayed with me. He was not a bad man, he was a frightened one. I did not want to believe it, because anger felt so much cleaner than understanding. Anger gave me somewhere to put all the pain, a wall to throw it against. Understanding meant sitting in the mess of it, holding both the father who lied and the father who loved me at the same time, and I did not think I was strong enough for that. But somewhere underneath all my fury, a small and stubborn question had begun to grow, and it would not leave me alone no matter how hard I tried to silence it. The question was simply this: where is he now? Where is Daniel? It took me nearly a month to work up the courage to search. I told myself I only wanted to know, that I was not going to actually do anything about it. But late one night I typed his name and the city from the letter into my computer, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Adoption records are sealed, and I did not have much to go on, only a first name and a rough year and a place. I found nothing that first night, or the second, or the 10th. But I could not stop. It had become the only thing that felt like it mattered, the one thread that might lead me back toward the father I had lost. I finally found him through a registry, one of those websites where adopted people and people who gave children up can each leave their information, hoping the other side is looking too. And there, on a plain white page, was a short entry from a young man named Daniel, born the exact year my father had written, in the exact city, searching for a father he had never met. My hands went cold, and I read his words over and over. He had written that he only wanted to know where he came from, to know if the people who made him had ever thought about him at all. And I knew, with total certainty, that this was my brother. I did not tell my mother right away. I was afraid she would try to stop me, or worse, that she would want to come with me and turn it into something official and careful and slow, and I could not bear the waiting. So I made an account on that registry, and I sat staring at the blank message box for almost 2 hours, deleting everything I typed. What do you even say to a brother you have known about for 2 months? In the end I kept it simple. I wrote that I believed we shared a father, that our father had recently passed away, and that he had thought about Daniel every single day of his life. I hit send before I could talk myself out of it, and then I felt sick for 3 days waiting for a reply that I was certain would never come. I imagined every possible rejection. He would be angry. He would think I was lying, or after money, or cruel. He would tell me that a dead father was worth nothing to a man who had spent his whole life without one. I had almost convinced myself to give up when my computer chimed one evening, and I saw his name, and my heart nearly stopped. He had written back. His message was only 4 lines long, but I read those 4 lines more times than I can count, and everything in me went very still and very quiet. He wrote that he had dreamed his whole life of getting a message exactly like mine, and that now that it had come, he did not know whether to laugh or to weep. He said he was sorry that our father was gone, and that it was a strange grief to mourn a man he had never met but had wondered about since he was a small child. And then he asked, in the last line, if I would be willing to meet him, because he had never had a single blood relative in the entire world, and now, out of nowhere, he had a sister. I read that word, sister, and something inside me that had been clenched tight for 2 months finally, quietly, began to loosen. We agreed to meet at a small coffee shop halfway between our 2 cities, on a Saturday morning in the middle of June. I told my mother the night before, and instead of the resistance I feared, she just held my hands and cried, and told me that my father would have wanted this more than anything in the world. I barely slept. The next morning I sat in that coffee shop 40 minutes early, watching the door, my stomach in knots, a cold cup of tea going untouched in front of me. And then the bell above the door rang, and a young man walked in, and I did not need him to say a word. I knew him instantly. He had our father's eyes. He was 25 years old, tall and a little unsure of himself, and when he saw me sitting there he stopped completely still, as if he too had recognized something he had waited his whole life to see. We just looked at each other for a long moment across that little room, 2 strangers who were not strangers at all. Then he walked over, and neither of us knew whether to shake hands or hug, and in the awkward fumbling of it we both started to laugh, a nervous, watery, overwhelmed kind of laughter. When we finally sat down, the first thing he said to me was that I had our father's smile. And I had to look away, because I could not speak. We talked for 6 hours. The coffee shop staff must have thought we were mad, 2 people who could not stop talking and could not stop crying, ordering drink after drink just to keep our table. He told me about the family who had adopted him, good people, kind people, who had loved him well. But he told me there had always been a hollow place in him, a question mark shaped like a father, and he had grown up wondering whose eyes he had, whose hands, whose way of walking. I pulled out the photograph, the one of our father at 19 holding him as a newborn, and I watched my brother see his own beginning for the very first time. He held that photograph like it was made of glass. His hands were shaking, and tears ran down his face without him seeming to notice them at all. He whispered that all his life he had told himself a story, that his birth father had simply not wanted him, had handed him away without a backward glance and never thought of him again. That was the wound at the very center of him. And now here was proof, in our father's own handwriting on the back of a photo, 3 words, "My son Daniel," and a letter that said he had been remembered every single day for 25 years. I watched a lifetime of that old story quietly fall apart. I took the letter out too, our father's unsent confession, and I let Daniel read it. I watched his face as he moved down the lines, and I saw him meet the father he never got, not as a villain who abandoned him, but as a terrified 19-year-old boy who was given no choice at all, who held his son for 11 minutes and then carried the loss for the rest of his life. When Daniel finished, he set the letter down very gently and put his face in his hands, and he wept in a way I had never seen before. And I realized, sitting there, that my anger had completely disappeared. There was no room left in me for it anymore. Because I could see, so clearly now, what my father had been. Not a liar hiding a shameful secret, but a grieving man protecting a wound too deep to touch. He had not kept Daniel from me out of coldness. He had kept it because saying it out loud made the loss fresh, and I think he simply could not survive reliving it every day out in the open. He was not perfect. He made a young man's mistake and then a lifetime of quiet, careful, cowardly choices around it. But he was not cruel, and he was not heartless. He was just a human being carrying something too heavy, the way so many of us do, in silence, hoping it will not crush us. Daniel and I sat in the empty coffee shop until they nearly closed, and when we finally walked out into the warm evening light, something had permanently changed between us. We were not two strangers who happened to share a father anymore. We were family, real family, welded together in a single afternoon by grief and by love and by a photograph and a letter. Before we said goodbye in the parking lot, he pulled me into a hug, a proper one this time, and he held on tight, and he said thank you for finding me, thank you for giving me my father even though it was too late to meet him. And I held my brother and I cried. On the long drive home, I felt something I had not felt in months. It was not happiness exactly, because the grief was still there, and it always would be. It was more like peace, a settling, the feeling of a broken bone finally being set back into its rightful place. I had gone looking for a stranger out of pure anger, wanting to expose my father, to prove he was not the man I thought. And instead I had found a brother, and in finding him I had found my father again too, flaws and fear and love all together. The man I got back was more real than the one I had lost. And I loved him more for it. I brought Daniel home to meet my mother 2 weeks later. I had worried about that meeting more than any of it, because he was living proof of the one great sorrow of her marriage, and I did not know how she would bear it. I should not have doubted her for a second. She opened the door and looked at him, at those familiar eyes and that familiar smile, and she began to cry, and then she pulled him into her arms as though she had been waiting for him for 25 years too. She told him that he was welcome in this house for the rest of his life, that he was part of us now, that our door would never be closed to him again. Daniel started coming to family dinners. He would sit in the chair that had been my father's, and at first that was hard for all of us, but slowly it became right, became a kind of healing, as though a missing piece had finally come home to its place at the table. He and I talked almost every day. I learned that he loved old films and terrible puns and fishing at dawn, exactly like our father, things no one had taught him, things that had simply traveled down through blood across all those separated years. It astonished me every time. We had grown up in different houses, different cities, different families, and yet there were pieces of the same man living quietly inside us both. There were hard days too. I will not pretend it was all warmth and easy joy. Daniel carried decades of a specific pain that I could never fully understand, the pain of being the one who was given away, and sometimes it surfaced in ways that were sharp and sudden. There were nights he grew quiet and distant, wrestling with an old anger at a father who could no longer answer for anything. And I had my own hard nights, my own resentment that flickered back to life when I least expected it. But we chose, again and again, to stay in it together. Family, I was learning, is not the absence of pain. It is the decision to stay through it. One evening, months into knowing him, Daniel told me something I have never forgotten. He said that for his entire life he had felt like a mistake, like something to be hidden and erased, because that is the story an abandoned child so easily tells himself. But finding us had rewritten that story completely. He was not a mistake, he said. He was a son who was loved and grieved by a father who simply lost him. He was a brother who had been wanted all along, by a family that had not known to look for him. He said I had given him back his own history, and a sense that he belonged somewhere in this world. And I told him he had given me back my father. Because that is the strange gift in all of this. Before I found Daniel, my father had become a stranger to me, frozen in the moment of that terrible discovery, forever the man who lied. But knowing Daniel thawed him. Every story we pieced together, every trait we found we shared, every tear we shed over that old photograph brought my father back into focus as a whole and human person. I stopped seeing only the secret. I started seeing the frightened boy in the hospital, the young man giving up his son, the grown father carrying that grief in silence so it would not poison the family he built later. I forgave him. Not all at once, but truly, and it set something free inside me. I understand now that forgiveness was never really about my father. He was gone. My forgiveness could not reach him, could not lift a single ounce of the weight he had already carried to his grave. Forgiveness was about me. As long as I held on to my anger, I was the one it poisoned, I was the one lying awake, I was the one whose every good memory had been contaminated. The moment I let it go, I stopped drinking that poison. Forgiving my father did not excuse what he did or pretend it never happened. It simply released me from carrying it. And in that release I got back not only my father, but my own peace, and my own ability to breathe again in my own life. Daniel is 30 now, and I am 21, and he is one of the most important people in my world. He walked me through my first real heartbreak. He was there when I moved into my first apartment, carrying boxes up 3 flights of stairs and complaining the whole time exactly like our father would have. My mother thinks of him as a son. My future children will know him as their uncle. The half-brother I did not know existed, the secret that once felt like a betrayal too big to survive, has become one of the greatest blessings of my life. Out of the most painful soil I have ever stood on, something beautiful and permanent has grown, and it is still growing today. If there is one thing I have learned from all of this, it is that the people we love are almost never as simple as we need them to be. My father was gentle and he was a coward. He was honest and he kept a secret for 30 years. He loved me completely and he grieved another child in silence the whole time. He was all of it at once, the way every human being is, and learning to hold someone in their full and flawed humanity is one of the hardest and most freeing things we ever do. We do not have to choose between the person who hurt us and the person who loved us. Most of the time, they are exactly the same person. And the second thing I learned is that family can grow in the most painful soil there is. My family did not shrink when the secret came out. It grew. It grew by one brother, one nephew, one uncle, one whole new branch that none of us knew was waiting. The anger I felt was real and it was justified, but if I had let it harden into a wall, I would have lost the greatest gift my father ever gave me, a brother, arriving 25 years late through a letter he never got to send. Forgiveness did not free him. It freed me. And in freeing myself, I found a family bigger and truer than the one I thought I had lost. Thank you so much for staying with me all the way to the end of this story. It truly means the world to me that you are here and that you listened. If Daniel's story and mine touched your heart in any way, please take a moment to give this video a like, and subscribe to AU Family Channel, where a brand new story is waiting for you every single week. And remember this. Family can grow in the most painful soil, and the forgiveness you give is the gift that most sets you free. Hold the people you love in all their flaws, and let your heart stay open to the family you have not met yet. I will see you in the next one.